When I first was out there, bro.
But using his new power wisely turned out to be David's greatest challenge. And by far, the most important lessons taught by David's story come from his failures.
David is not a plaster saint. He's not a perfect man. He's a man governed by his passions and ambitions, specifically his passions for women. So parallel to his struggle for power, the Bible allows us to see the intimate details of his private life, his love affairs with many women, the most famous of which is his love affair with Bathsheba.
One day, while standing on the roof of his palace, David saw a young woman bathing on a nearby rooftop.
David made inquiries about this woman and was told, "Why, that is Bathsheba." David then sent messengers to fetch her. She came to him, and he lay with her.
When Bathsheba told him she was pregnant, David arranged to have her husband killed in battle.
He looks out the window of the palace and sees this beautiful woman bathing on the roof of a house below him, and that's where he gets into trouble. But the trouble is not just sex. The trouble is his bumbling attempts to cover up the adultery, and when he can't do that, to get rid of the husband by murder. Once he's done that, everything starts to fall apart in his life.
After David married Bathsheba, God sent a prophet to confront him. And David confessed to his sin.
In the ancient world, the king is the law. And the key moment of this story of David and Bathsheba is when David stands there and says, "Yes, I sinned and will be punished." Because it is at that moment that we realize that Israel's revolution has won. That in fact, David recognizes that God is above all human beings, and that no human being, not a king, not a warrior, not even a prophet, can be above the law.
In punishment for his sin, God cursed David and his descendants.
For this, your household shall never be free of the sword. You have worked in secret, but I shall work for all Israel to see.
In his later years, David would be betrayed by his favorite son and grow to be a frail and lonely old man. For the writers of the Bible, David's breaking of the commandments and God's curse upon his house helped to explain the disasters Israel would suffer in the years after David. The Bible says, and the archaeological record confirms, that in 720 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern 10 tribes of the Israelites and deported them to the far-flung reaches of their empire. Before long, they assimilated with their new neighbors, and most of the Israelites were lost forever from the pages of history. Soon after, the Assyrians began to threaten the last remaining tribe of the Israelites, Judah. The account of what happened is one of the most important in the Bible, for hidden within it is the surprising story of how monotheism actually took root in Judah. In 640 BC, the land of Judah ruled by King Josiah. Josiah was desperately afraid that his people were unprepared to face the threat not just from Assyria, but from Egypt and Babylon. Most Judeans were still rural people who cared nothing about Jerusalem and its king. They also knew little about Israel's covenant with the one God. In fact, many Judeans appear to have worshipped a goddess named Asherah, who they believed was the God of Israel's wife.
From a superficial reading of the Hebrew Bible, you would suppose that all the early Israelites were monotheists. Most archaeologists and most biblical scholars now believe, however, that monotheism was a very late development and perhaps did not emerge full-blown until after the fall of Jerusalem in the early 6th century. So, most of the early Israelites were polytheists. They worshipped a new god, Yahweh, perhaps, but alongside them they worshipped El, the old male deity of the Canaanite pantheon. And above all, they worshipped Asherah, the mother goddess. We now know that. This is very disturbing to many people, but God had a lady friend.
But King Josiah and his allies among the temple priests in Jerusalem decided to rally the nation around the belief in one all-powerful God. And so, in 622 BC, they claimed that deep within the temple, they had found an unknown book written by Moses called Deuteronomy.
While they were cleaning out the temple, suddenly someone comes running out to the high priest. Look, we found the book in the temple. Now, from the language in which this book is quoted, we know that we are dealing with the book of Deuteronomy. Contemporary scholars believe that the book of Deuteronomy was actually written around that time and placed in the temple to be discovered in order to motivate the reform.
The book of Deuteronomy banned the worship of Asherah and other pagan gods. Even more important, it said that Yahweh himself could only be worshipped at the temple in Jerusalem. And so, according to the Bible, Josiah sent his troops to the mountaintops, where Israelites had been making sacrifices for centuries.
Josiah destroyed all the shrines on the high places which the kings of Israel had built to provoke Yahweh's anger. All the priests of the high places who were there, he slaughtered on the altars. And on those altars burned the human bones.
It was one of the major religious revolutions of ancient Israel, because now you couldn't just go any place you wanted to sacrifice the animal. You could only do it at one place. This was the beginning of monotheism in Israel. The archaeological record and the biblical record itself attest to the fact that monotheism didn't catch on overnight. And people didn't just run out and say, oh, I see, there's only one God. Well, I'll just get rid of all these statues I have in the house that belong to my great-grandfather and everyone before him, and I'll stop worshiping all these gods I've always worshipped. It was an extraordinary new thought for people.
Deuteronomy was an incredible achievement. It brought monotheism to life for Judeans by retelling the story of Moses, focusing above all on his teachings about how human beings should treat one another. The first to be inspired by the new book was one of the great social prophets, Jeremiah, who told the people of Judah of the promise God made to them in Deuteronomy.
If you truly treat one another fairly, if you do not steal from the stranger, the orphan, or the widow, if you do not shed innocent blood, and if you do not follow other gods, then I shall let you stay in this place, in the country I gave forever to your ancestors of old.
The demand is that we care for one another and love one another. And in so doing, the prophets tell us, that is how you find God. The social prophets are ferocious in their insistence that if you have wealth, it must be shared. You can't just simply, as Amos says, lie on your couches of ivory and drink wine. If you're not feeding the poor, it doesn't make a difference whether you go to church or synagogue, you're failing God.
With the nation now governed by the laws of Deuteronomy, King Josiah believed he would have God on his side in his battle to save Judah. He decided to launch a surprise attack on the Egyptian-Assyrian alliance that he judged to be the greatest danger to his people. In 609 BC, Josiah and his men ambushed an Egyptian army. But in the battle that followed, the Judeans were routed, and King Josiah was killed. After Josiah's death, the kings that followed him re-established the worship of Asherah and all of the other gods. In response to their abandonment of monotheism, the prophet Jeremiah told the people of Judah that he had received an ominous message from God.
The word of Yahweh came to me. Make your way down to the potter's house. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working at the wheel. But the vessel he was making came out wrong, as may happen with clay when a potter is at work. So he began over again. Then the word of Yahweh came to me. House of Israel, can I not do to you what this potter does? Listen, I am preparing a disaster for you.
According to Jeremiah, God was so angry, he decided to send the Judeans into exile and start over.
Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and carried off all the treasures of the temple of Yahweh and all the treasures of the palace. Then he carried Jerusalem off into exile.
With the Babylonians' conquest of Judah, the scribes had come to the end of their story of how the chosen people were sent into exile. Yet even with this new Bible in their possession, the Judeans seemed destined to disappear, like all the other tiny nations uprooted from their homelands. For in a world where empires swept away all who stood in their path, how could a book of stories save a people from extinction? But in Babylon, something remarkable happened. As the Judean exiles read and studied the Bible, their vision of who they were was transformed.
These would be great stories even if they were just stories about the past. But for the people of Israel, these stories were their story. So when you learned the story of Israelites becoming free of slavery in Egypt and experiencing extraordinary things on the way out. You didn't just read that as a great story to tell the kids. It was your own belief in the power, the importance of liberation, of becoming free. So it's not just history, it's not just memory. It's a life, it's part of you.
The exiles also came to a new understanding of why they were in Babylon from reading the Bible.
It contains a record of the covenant between the people of Israel and their God. But it also lists the penalties for violating the covenant. And among the penalties that are listed is exile. Here you have a historical book that tells a religious story. It's not a real historical book. It's a vehicle expressing a religious philosophy. But the religious philosophy is God is fair, and if you are punished, there's a reason for it.
The stories also contained another message. For those who accepted their guilt and changed their ways, there was hope.
If you return to your God, if with all your heart and all your soul you obey his voice, then he will bring back your captives. Should you have been banished to the very sky's end, your God will gather you again, even from there.
For the short term, it was obvious what they had to do. They had to look at the covenant, and they had to start living by the covenant in exile. And what you actually see in the Babylonian exile is the transformation of Israelite religion into something new that we can call the earliest form of Judaism.
In Babylon, the Judeans embraced the belief in one all-powerful God as never before. And soon, in one of the most remarkable twists in history, their conviction that their God would allow a faithful people to return home was going to come true. Stay tuned for the conclusion of Kingdom of David.
PBS will return in a moment.
It is so.
It is not.
Ancient tribal artifact or just a rock? Better call the History Detectives. Coming this summer, only on PBS.
Next time on Nature. Skeletons of World War II lie hidden in the pristine waters around the Solomon Islands. Sunken warships and downed fighter planes become a different sort of battleground as all kinds of marine life, from the beautiful to the bizarre, fight to gain a foothold in war wrecks.
On the next Warrior Challenge, 8 volunteers voyage back to the Viking Age, where they get a taste of Nordic food.
It looks like someone's just spewed in the pan.
And learn to raid the neighbors.
Get back! Get out!
As they battle it out, they'll try not to lose face. Can they rise to meet the Warrior Challenge?
Next time.
Incredible.
On White Teeth.
I will not have him in the house. He's not my son.
The kids
That settles it. Something must be done.
become teenagers.
I'm at my wit's end. Seems to be going pretty well.
2, 3.
Busted!
ExxonMobil Masterpiece Theater presents
I've run away.
Praise be.
Zadie Smith's White Teeth.
We now return with Kingdom of David.